Hi, thanks for joining us today. Whether you're watching this live as part of our streaming webinar, or perhaps you're watching it sometime in the future on one of our streaming platforms. My name's Jason. I'm Chief Network Architect with LA Networks. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to be getting the most from your SD-WAN solution. If you've heard me speak before, usually I speak more or less in engineering terms and I'm more in the weeds. This time we're actually going to talk a little bit more about the business drivers and factors, as well as the process for evaluating and getting the most out of your SD-WAN solution. If you have any questions, you can please put them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. However, we are recording this, so you can always go back and rewatch it if you want to take a look at some of the slides or you have a particular point you want to recover. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach out as well. So here's the agenda today, and it'll be a fairly quick talk. We're really just going to have a quick introduction. We'll talk about the evolving WAN and how we need to help our business evolve to stay up with that. We'll talk about some steps that you want to probably follow for evaluating different SD-WAN solutions, what I sometimes call table stakes, like the things that you have to have at a minimum to be able to make sure you're getting the proper solution. And then we're just briefly going to go over kind of a 30,000 foot level, two different use cases. The first one's for a manufacturing company that we did a SD-WAN project for, and then the second one is for a property management company. So two incredibly different solutions, two incredibly different problems that they were trying to solve. And again, we'll just talk through some of the highlights of those. So for those who may not be familiar with LA Networks, we've been in business for over 20 years. I've been here for pretty much the whole time. And we are headquartered right here in Los Angeles. However, the projects we work on and complete are both national and global. Last December, for example, I was over in Tokyo doing a data center and AWS project. Although if you need that kind of close and personal touch in Los Angeles, we can put feet on the street right away. One of the things that really differentiates us from any other partner in this area is our commitment to engineering. Over 70% of our employees at LA Networks are engineers, and about a fourth of those are CCIEs. And lastly, we receive almost all of our business engagements from repeat customers, and almost all of our new business is from referrals. We like to think this is part of that engineering approach that we take, that when we get our engineers on a project, they do a really good job, whether that's SD-WAN, whether that's data center, whether that's cloud, and we tend to stay engaged as a partner with those customers. So let's kick in and talk a little bit about how the WAN is evolving. Over on the left, you can kind of see a much more traditional WAN. If you've been doing networking for, a decent length of time, this sort of WAN was pretty popular all the way back from when I started in the 90s to probably the 2000s, the early to mid 2000s. This was a very common way to build our WANs. The cloud in the middle could really be any cloud, MPLS or internet, but we would have our branches, we would have all our data somewhere, probably in a data center or maybe in our corporate headquarters. And the branches would just kind of connect southbound into that, wherever that repository of data is. It might look a little different. Maybe you're a larger organization and you have two data centers, or maybe you have regional data centers. But the basic flow was kind of this north to south flow. And the way that things have changed, and it wasn't like an overnight change, it was something that kind of evolved, is the need for our data to kind of disperse. It no longer sits in a single repository in the center of the network. Nowadays, our data sits in lots of different repositories in lots of different locations, right? So I think I mentioned AWS earlier, so maybe some of your data resides in an infrastructure cloud like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. And you need to be able to get to that data up there. Or maybe some of your data resides in a software-based cloud, something like Salesforce or Box.com or Office 365. And some of your data needs to get over there. And maybe some of your data is still in these centralized repositories in a data center, right? And the other thing is, of course, as time has evolved, the requirements on the network from a operations and uptime perspective is increased as well. So we kind of have this data that's kind of dispersed all over the place. And the operational requirements have become much more strict for us, so we have to be able to get to it. And you have a lot of natural questions that you look at when you see something like this, such as, well, do I want to bring all my sites back to a headquarters and just go out a single internet pipe, which is fine? Do I want to allow them to get to the internet directly so that they have a better Office 365 experience, for example, right? That's fine too. It really kind of comes down to evaluating things. But if you're going to do that, you need to start thinking about, well, how do I secure those endpoints? How do I make sure that they're only doing the things I want them to do in, say, Office 365 or Salesforce, but not watching, cat videos on YouTube or something like that. When you take a look at the traditional WAN, there's really kind of 6 main pillars that we could put most of the limitations into. And at a minimum, any SD-WAN solution that you take a look at should really address these 6 items, right? The first 2 are kind of centered around bandwidth, either insufficient bandwidth or high cost bandwidth, or possibly both. So back in the kind of early 2000s, maybe around 2005, 2006, MPLS became very popular as a technology. It existed before that, but it started becoming really popular. I remember from like 2005 to probably 2010, it seemed like I did so many MPLS rollouts. And that was low bandwidth at high cost. Now, to be clear, it's very high quality bandwidth as well. It's very nice that the service provider kind of works with you on things like QoS. But back in the early days, it was challenging to even get a 10 meg link, let alone something like a 100 meg link. And gig links were really either just cost prohibitive or incredibly rare. And at the same time, you kind of started to have a ramp up on cheap, high bandwidth internet circuits. Now, the quality isn't as good as on MPLS, but there might be a valid question as to how critical is that? What's the point where maybe I want to start using or supplementing the internet? And we had technologies such as DMVPN and IWAN, which underpin almost all SD-WAN solutions, regardless of the vendor. Maybe the concept does, maybe not that exact implementation. So it used to be very difficult to kind of do that supplement. And so that's the first 2 keys. The next one is fragmented security. We talked earlier, if I'm going to, for example, allow my branches to go straight to the internet for, let's say, Office 365 transactions, how do I make sure that that's done securely? How do I make sure that we configure it and manage it centrally, right? So that's kind of what we mean by fragmented security, right? Making sure that we have a nice holistic view of everything. The next one would be limited app awareness. Now, again, back in those early days of internet-based WANs, we didn't even try to really QoS much on the internet because there was not much that you could QoS. And even if we had a private WAN like an MPLS, the QoS mechanism can be a little bit ungainly. It kind of had to belong to the CCIE Jedi Council or something to define your apps. And even then, your apps were defined based on a port, a protocol, and an IP address, right? So wouldn't it be nice if we had things like some kind of software that was able to automatically recognize app and say, oh, that's a SQL transaction. I understand SQL, and here's how I want to treat SQL. Oh, that's a voice call. I understand voice calls, and here's how I'm going to treat that transaction. And then the next one would be, not being cloud ready. So as we kind of talked, one of the big drivers of WAN evolution is cloud readiness, and that could be infrastructure cloud, that could be a software cloud, either really. However, you want something that's going to work with whatever your cloud requirements are. And maybe you don't have any today, but almost assuredly, most organizations are at least starting to evaluate it, and a lot of them have bought in wholeheartedly, right? So you want something that kind of works along those lines. And the last one is the complexity of operations. We talked about how operations became a real driving factor in the evolving WAN. It used to be that you could easily negotiate your outages. Oh, if I take the network down from 10 p.m. to midnight on a Friday, no one's using it anyway, it's fine. I can do my maintenances then, and so forth. Or if I had, two circuits, one would be active, one would be passive, and so forth. These days, that doesn't really tend to pass muster anymore. We're really looking at how can I simplify my operations and how can I react to things more quickly or even possibly predict them. So let's talk a little bit about evaluating the SD-WAN solutions themselves. And these are in no particular order, but the first one would be your deployment options. And there's kind of two sub-phases to how to deploy things. One is the management for your SD-WAN solution. And from that perspective, you should be able to deploy either in a cloud platform, such as AWS or Azure, or on-prem. Now, I'm going to be honest, almost everyone I work with ultimately goes with the cloud platform. That's because all the SD-WAN vendors have already really come up with a solution where all the business logic and workflow is built around cloud platforms. They may be limited on which cloud platforms they support, or they may not. However, things like your scaling groups, your HR or DR, et cetera, high availability, that logic is already usually built in to the solution. And then some solutions, like say the Cisco SD-WAN solution, it's already paid for with your licensing. You don't pay anything extra for all the management components or any of the HR or HA, and so forth. However, maybe you're in an organization that's highly governed and you simply cannot do a cloud management. Well, then you want to do on-prem. And so really when we're talking about the deployment options for management, we're just saying you probably want to look at a solution that provides both options, right? So regardless of whichever one you ultimately end up going with, it would be nice to know that you have a path forward in either direction. The other side of deployment options is what are you actually going to deploy at your sites? And a site gets kind of defined as anything that connects directly to your network. So that could be an infrastructure as a service cloud like AWS or Azure, or it could be a branch location or a store. It could be a data center. And so again, having some flexibility on how to deploy. Can you deploy these SD-WAN routers, for example, directly into AWS or GCP or something like that? What hardware options do I have? Do I only have one model to pick from and it's got to be one size fits all? Or do I kind of get a pick and choose? You should really have some flexibility there. Or perhaps you're kind of a white box sort of approach and you want to run these in VMs. So you should have the flexibility to do all of these things, right? And ultimately, when we're evaluating SD-WAN solutions, that's kind of what I want to stress, is we're really looking at what are the requirements for my business to really make this successful, to make you successful, but also how much flexibility do I have when things change? And we're probably all pretty familiar with this at this point with COVID and everything, right? Where one day we're all coming into the office, we're all working like normal, and then the next day we're all working from home. And there's a lot of IT angst then of like, how do I spin this up to be able to deal with it? So we want to make sure that we're staying flexible anytime we're evaluating these different SD-WAN solutions, right? The next item is service rich. And what do I mean by service rich? It sounds a little bit like a buzzword, so let's define it better. One is security. Now, your security needs might be different from another person's security needs and so forth. So again, the key word on all service rich is flexibility. If I need to secure only my main headquarters edge because all my internet traffic flows through there anyway, and what I really want is just secure traffic to get back to my headquarters or something like that, you should be able to support that. You should also be able to support with no substantial change if you want to deploy the same solution and allow internet service leaking out at the branch. So if you might want, maybe you want to say something like, oh, I would like for the branches to be able to go directly to Office 365 and Dropbox and Salesforce, because those are kind of key and critical to me. And there's no reason to slow them down by bringing them all the way back to my headquarters in Los Angeles or something. I'm not saying it has to be one or the other. What I'm saying is the solutions you're evaluating should be able to support either, right? Appware, right? Like I mentioned earlier, in QoS, we really don't want to have to go back to the days of, hard coding our applications so that every time I maybe update ERP or something like that, I got to go back and reevaluate how to QoS it. Then I got to go back and redo all my QoS policies on all my WAN routers. We should have something that's app aware. It can detect the apps. It can understand the treatment that we want for them. I should be able to easily define what that treatment is and deal with it accordingly, right? Collaboration. Now, collaboration is one that maybe it's critical to you and maybe it's not. So again, this is one of those, let's be flexible. Let's have some options here when we're evaluating these different solutions, right? So when I talk about collaboration, what I mean is, part of it's the app aware. Can it detect, my RTP, my voice streams, for example, right? And part of it is things like, is it, can I possibly terminate like a SIP trunk directly on my SD-WAN router? There's very few solutions that do, but there are some out there. The Cisco one does, for example. There's some caveats. And maybe that's important to you and maybe that's not, but you probably at a minimum want those options available to you or understand what the parameters are around doing that. What are the caveats, right? And the last one for service rich is cloud readiness. This one I see more and more. I find a lot of locations, if they're saying we really don't plan to go cloud, that tends to be a temporary thing, whether they know it's going to be temporary or not. Eventually, they're either already cloud and they just aren't thinking about it that way. I see a lot of people who have Office 365 who say that we don't really do anything cloud. It's like, well, you're using Office 365, you're doing cloud. So we all saw yesterday during the outage for Office 365, right? So you should have something defined for what does cloud readiness mean for your company, right? Because again, it might be different company to company. And then the last one is it should be truly ISP and transport agnostic. And in this, really what I'm talking about is you shouldn't be beholden to any one particular contract with an ISP or something like that. You should be able to order any circuit, any service from anywhere. If you want MPLS, that's great. If you want internet, that's great. If you want 5G or LTE, that's fine. If you want satellite, that's fine. If you want all four of those, that's fine, right? You should have flexibility there. You shouldn't be limited. If you're looking at an SD-WAN solution and it feels like you're being trapped or limited into something like this, you probably need to reevaluate that. And if you need some assistance, by all means, please reach out to us. We do this sort of thing all day, every day, and we can help you out to make sure you don't get locked into something. Let's talk a little bit about when we're evaluating, the hype versus the reality. And this just comes from having done several SD-WAN engagements over the last few years. And you could make a list that was a lot longer. I just made this one because these are probably the most common items I hear. The first one is, oh, this is great. With SD-WAN, you don't need network people anymore, right? My help desk can just manage everything networking. The reality is a little bit more complicated than that. There is truth that from an operational standpoint, you can probably push a lot of the day-to-day operations a little bit downstream to maybe your help desk or something, right? You can even use, I didn't mention it before, but coming back here, all of this should get tied with APIs, right? We should have a nice open API to talk to all these things. And I've seen it before where we do things like integrating, say, ServiceNow with certain types of events in your SD-WAN solution. So you can kind of react in real time to things like circuit outages or even degradations, right? So that being said, you definitely want someone who's still network savvy when you're doing the architecture and the design, so that you make sure that you're getting the most out of your solution. And of course, you'll still need network people for all the things that don't fall under WAN, whether that's security-based, whether that's LAN switching-based or data center, et cetera, right? The next one I hear all the time is true transport independence or internet only, meaning, oh yeah, you definitely are truly independent of any particular type of transport. I've also heard the flip of that, which is, oh, SD-WAN, it only works with internet circuits. My advice here is don't tie yourself to a single ISP. Be aware that you're still going to need circuits, but you should be able to work with the vendors that you most trust and get the appropriate circuit for your sites, right? Because it can be very difficult, especially if you're maybe a large international sort of corporation. You might find, telecommunications can be a little bit challenging in some countries over others. And if nothing else, they're different. So you should have lots of different options there. That's what you really need to be looking at in reality. You hear this all the time. Security is quote unquote always on. I don't really know what that even means. But I will tell you the reality is it's a mixed bag. SD-WAN out of the box, pretty much regardless of the vendor, does have some security enhancements. Like, for example, pretty much every packet out of the data plane is always encrypted. And that's really good. That means my traffic's nice and protected. However, encrypted is not the same as secure, right? Encryption can play a part in security. It can also play a part in the opposite of security, right? But there should be a lot more, right? How do you deal with things like firewalling? How do you deal with things like content filtering, right? Can you integrate with a SASE solution and things like that? And so security should really be a much more deep conversation than is everything encrypted in like an IPsec tunnel going out of the SD-WAN edge? Because the answer to that is almost always going to be yes, it will be. If you want to do some kind of secure internet gateway through your umbrella deployment or something, well, maybe, right? Let's talk about it. Let's make sure you're getting the needs met that you have. And then the last one on the hype is, oh yeah, the solution, it's definitely cloud ready. The reality, again, comes down to yes and no. You need to understand your cloud needs and almost as importantly, what your cloud strategy is. So not just what you're doing today in cloud, but what is your strategy over the next few years for cloud, and see what fits. Software as a service is an interesting example of that, where no vendor is going to be able to hit every single SaaS application. So you want to be sure to talk about what happens when I have a SaaS application that's not in the supported vendor list. How are you going to deal with that? And they should have a good answer that makes you feel confident. Oh, okay, it's still going to work. Maybe I don't get some certain bells and whistles, but everything's going to work, right? Now let's talk about a couple of use cases. So this first one was a manufacturing company, and they're a large multinational corporation. However, they had some key manufacturing facilities that they wanted to kind of protect from certain natural disasters, things like hurricanes and monsoons. And so their traditional network was just all MPLS. However, at these manufacturing sites, they decided that they wanted to put in a microwave link that went straight to the internet, and then they wanted to put a satellite link in. And then they wanted the logic to go such that the site would always use MPLS if it was available. It would use the microwave if the MPLS went down, and then it would only use the satellite if both the MPLS and the microwave were down. And then on the satellite, we wanted to be very restrictive because there's a lot of delay, and it may not be synchronous in terms of your bandwidth speeds and so forth. So I needed to be very controlling on what apps went over the satellite. Like, for example, no phone calls go over the satellite, right? Because it's already going to be a terrible voice experience. And then on top of that, they want the flexibility later on to be able to use that microwave as an internet circuit for direct internet access to certain cloud apps, like Office 365 is a big one for them. And if you think about this from just a traditional networking perspective, just normal routers, this is more or less impossible. You might be able to get it to work in a lab with enough time. There'd be a lot of manual processes, and it would be a nightmare to support, right? It would be really difficult. However, this is just a couple of policies and templates that we build, and then it's all taken care of. So this is a great case study, really, for how SD-WAN kind of empowers us. The next one is a totally different type of company. They have a large footprint. It's all within the US, and they're a property management company. And they had kind of an interesting use case of they wanted to be able to support one WAN for their corporate environment, for their property managers who are at these different properties all around. But they wanted to be able to create a new product offering to enhance the experience of some of their tenants, that if they wanted, that they could build a little mini WAN for the tenants that were at maybe multiple properties, right? And so they really want to be able to support many topologies across their WAN infrastructure and keep them all secure from one another, so that company A can talk to only company A networks, company B can only talk to company B networks, and of course the corporate network only talks to the corporate network. And if the last situation seemed difficult, this one seems really impossible, to be able to do all these different topologies and then be able to manage it. So again, with SD-WAN, this is right in the wheelhouse of what it can do. Not every solution can, but the one that we put in place for them can do exactly what we want it to do. And so you have this kind of capability that normally in a normal traditional WAN would just be near impossible. So we're kind of wrapping up now. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate, this is being recorded, and so you can watch this at any time. If you want to get in contact with us, by all means you can. You could go to our website, la-networks.com, or you could reach out to me directly, and you can see my email address and my phone. And if you just have questions about these slides, that's great. Or if you would like to engage a little bit deeper because you're getting ready to do an SD-WAN evaluation and you would like some assistance with that, again, that's kind of one of our bread and butter items. We do this all the time. We'd be happy to talk to you and make sure that you have the right experience and that you're getting out of this exactly what your business needs. That's about it today. I want to thank everyone for taking a half hour to kind of come and learn about this. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. We have quite a few engineers on it. And anyway, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.